mostly working with at the time, Dave Acosta, also a huge Elvira fan, and he said the same thing. And it's funny you mentioned Bob Hope, because part of how I think I was thinking a little too hard about what premise can I surround Elvira with. And he kind of made it clear to me that Elvira is her own premise. Mm-hmm. And she, you don't need to create a world for her. You put her in worlds and she comments on those worlds. It's that thing. And you can sort of tell, not to shift completely to politics, but when there are people who will say that every politician is bought and every politician is this and every politician is that. And I'm like, you've never worked on a campaign. You've never been to a state house. You've never talked to someone who holds elective office. They're human beings and they exist on exactly the same scale as every other human being. Some of them are the worst people in the world. Some of them are the best people in the world. Some of them have figured out how to make compromises that they need to make to get things done. Some of them are uncompromising. Some of those don't get anything done.
Make the wrong compromise and we don't. It's all messy.
No, absolutely. The way in which these guys don't, it's like with online trolls, when you realize that they look for negative attention because they have no clue how to get positive attention. If they did, they'd try it. If they knew how to make people like them. But if you don't know how to make people like you, the only way to get their attention is to make them hate you. And when people are like, no, I'm trolling on purpose, I'm like, what does that accomplish for you? What's the positive outcome for you of strangers on the internet hating your guts is what? They notice that you exist. How small is that? Mm-hmm. How small a thing to aspire to of you noticed me. You acknowledged my presence. It's like, and the other thing, and I've said variations of this is, the thing is, I'm going to forget you exist in 6 seconds and you're still going to be mad at me in a month.
Oh, yeah.
That's because I loom a lot bigger in your imagination than you do in mine, buddy. You are just another anonymous idiot that I don't ever have to think about again, And it's why, I've little sidebar on the online debate thing, that I used to go through periods of going, I do this too much and I fight with trolls too much, whatever. And there was a period where the world tried to remind me why you do it. And I would literally run into, someone I barely know in a bookstore and they'd say, oh, thank you so much for posting that thing about the abortion laws in blah, 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 because I was having an argument with a coworker and I used that. Mm-hmm. I had that. And, you always get that answer of like, well, you're never going to convince them or you're never going to convince me. You're the bag that I'm punching in the boxing demonstration. I'm teaching them how to box. I don't give a shit about you. Exactly. I'm showing people how to throw a punch. How does the bag feel about it? I don't care. I'm not trying to impress the bag. The bag's just a bag. And if classically debate is not about, no debate has ever ended with the con person saying, well, I'm convinced you're right. It's like, no, but 1,000 people in the audience watch and go, well, it's pretty clear who brought the facts and the reality and I will say that as an aside, that arguing about things on the internet, I have a pathological hatred of being loud and wrong. Mm-hmm. So I look shit up. Oh, like yeah. I'm more well informed on any number of issues because I never, ever, ever wanted to post something and have someone give me the screenshot of like, no, that's actually that's factually not true.
Well, and everyone's they have a desire to always say periodically, like, oh, you could never have made Blazing Saddles today because the world is too woke. And I'm like, that is a very woke film in 1974.
It is the most woke film. I went to see it recently. I've said before that I think that in 20, 30 years, you're going to get some teenagers seeing it for the first time and go, oh, was this made in like 2009 about Barack Obama? Clearly, the drunk old white guy is Joe Biden. I think that's obvious. The crooked land developer is Trump. Like it falls really neatly. But I saw that again in the middle of the Obama thing, and the way that Brooks unflinchingly presents the entire world as a racist nightmare. One of the darkest moments in American film is when the little girl, the little old lady on the street says, "Up yours, N-word," to him after he says, "Good morning, ma'am." Mm-hmm. And he's devastated by it. And Gene Wilder's like, "What the hell? They're idiots. What can you? You're not going to change their minds by being." And I've always, some people will argue, "Oh, what if? How great would it have been if Pryor was in it?" It's the Sidney Poitier thing. That movie doesn't work if he's kind of a shifty, skeevy, sleazy dude. You need Superman playing Sheriff Bart. You need the handsomest, nicest, most charming human being on earth, which Cleavon Little is in that movie. He is inarguable. You know what I mean? You can't argue with his goodness. You know?
And it's not even respectability politics. It's just that Cleavon Little, and that is itself the commentary, is that he is your Jimmy Stewart or Glenn Ford of this era, but he won't be cast in films like that. He won't be do that because the world is racist.
Yep.
And and I think that speaks so well. Of course he's able to be much more deadpan as a result. I think he's hilarious and everything. But it's such a woke film now. As I've often said, it would be about a trans person and the idea of the cruelty of people towards this. Because I think everyone wants to retroactively be like, oh yes, in 1974, everyone understood that racism was bad and calling something the N-word is bad, and not having this, having a black authority figure is bad, and we get that. And it's like, no. But you realize
revolutionary
we do this today. It's like, you're just mad because you can't. It's like the trolls who are upset they couldn't get AI to say the N-word.
Right.
It's and that's all that's about.
When people say it couldn't be made today, I'm like, have you seen an episode of Atlanta? I mean, they're Donald Glover and I'm spacing on his name, Jordan Peele, are out there making Blazing Saddles every other day, man. I don't know what, maybe you need it explained to you more clearly, but like, if you think it couldn't get made today because of the use of the N-word, well, you haven't seen an episode of Atlanta. If you think it couldn't be made today because it's a genre film about racism, you didn't see Get Out either. Like, those movies are out there and people are still making them, and it's weird as hell to think that couldn't be. I mean, now I would say you could make All in the Family today, but it would be a mistake. Because in the 70s, the people who believed that Archie Bunker was the hero of the film, of the show, didn't have Twitter. And today, there would be such a concerted effort to intentionally misread it. No, Archie Bunker's the good guy, clearly. It's like, it's the fanboys who think Rorschach's the hero of Watchmen and not a psychopath.
Well, it's the danger you do get when you don't, because Norman Lear is a talented person. He's not doing something that's reductive. So Rob Reiner's character isn't always right. He's
not at all.
In many ways. He's arrogant. He looks down on, and so obviously that creates the opportunity to latch upon that and do it. I lost David here.
I got kicked out for a second.
No worries. I could I'll just edit that out.
Sure.
But yeah, as we were saying, I think the people who would misinterpret that because they just want to feel, and I think that's somewhat a challenge on the left as well. I mean, to be quote unquote, not to both sides it, but I think when Roseanne came back and I think she was going to be a Trump supporter, there were just, and some of my close friends were like, no, it can't be. And it's like, well, and this will happen a lot. It's like, well, here's the statistics of who voted for whom and where. And okay, is your idea that she is the 20% of people in this area who voted for Hillary Clinton, or or is she most likely the 60%, 80% of people who voted for Trump? And then let's try to figure out how she got there or whatever, and still humanize her. But obviously, here's the ways that she's wrong. The show is probably not obviously capable of doing that. But I think that often will come up. I mean, there's a sense of like Homer Simpson can't be a Trumpist because we like him,
Right.
even though a lot of who this character is would lead to, like, he's someone who MAGA would easily pick up. Of course, if you were to do it, he would have to be redeemed by the end, and
Yeah.
that's sort of as far as as a satire can go. And I think that
Right.
is a danger of the entire part of Trumpism, because maybe we're naive. I grew up in the era of, my hero was um, Michael J. Fox, not just in Back to the Future, but in
Mm-hmm.
Family Ties. There is a gag where he sort of quickly signs his dad's birthday card, and he's too busy to actually do his full name. He just puts APK. So I wound up 10-year-old me just signing everything SER, and that's why I always wind
That's
up
funny.
doing that. And but that works because his essential goodness comes through. He likes Nixon, he likes Reagan, and of course it helps he's played by Michael J. Fox, who's inherently charming, but he also loves his sister, despite what he
Yeah.
says. He loves when someone is being picked on, he's not going to be the one picking on him. He would
Right.
not be the one yelling at the trans kid. He's not going to be the one. That's not a conservative, and is going to be him, because it's just
Right.
not. Those are such horrible traits. Those are not traits Alex Keaton had, and he
Right.
was flawed, but he didn't have those traits. And so what happens is, like, later you realize, yeah, Alex Keaton, to the extent that a modern day Alex Keaton do the show now, it's Ben Shapiro, and that is not a likable person, right?
Right.
Like, it's not
Well, I
anything.
mean, again, I'm never particularly I'm never particularly awed by never Trumpers or quote unquote good Republicans, because they were, Liz Warren was on board with sexism, racism into her 40s, and I really grapple with any idea that she's intrinsically a good person. Like, if Ronald Reagan didn't make you not a Democrat, not a Republican in the 80s, I don't know what I can do for you. I don't know that I believe in people changing that thoroughly, especially people who are actually present themselves as someone who's been paying attention. With Alex Keaton, I always thought that there was this thing of like, well, he's going to grow out of that. But
Oh
by
yeah,
the same token, he's
and Ben
also,
Shapiro hated that about Family Ties. He's written
yeah.
stuff about the
Oh,
idea that,
really? And
oh yeah,
but
this is all about proving that conservatives are wrong, which is just so true of him. It's like, do you realize that show kind of laundered conservatism,
yeah,
made
oh,
young people,
absolutely.
made us
But I
actually
but
like a young
but
Reaganite,
I will
but you
also
hate it
say that,
because he's actually proven wrong occasionally?
yeah. But I will say that also in the Alex P. Keaton decade, um, George Bush ran for the Republican nomination in 1980 as a pro-choice Republican.
Oh yeah.
Kristen Todd Whitman was a pro-choice. Like, there were some reasonable Republicans
Sure.
out there.
And I think
They've all been
Warren
they've
and
all been
others,
killed.
and I think Liz Warren and others might fall into that plausible there was a sense of plausible deniability. I don't necessarily, I think most Black people, I'm part of them, was like, no, this is racist. This is a guy who's hanging out with Jesse Helms or whatever. But I do get that there was, okay, lift out your clueless veil. And so, oh, right, this is because I grew up in a time where, when I grew up in a Bible Belt or whatever, there were people who would be like horrified by a 1980 version of Tucker Carlson, even if they're voting for Reagan, even if they're, because
Right.
it's just, well, that's mean. That's what we don't do this or
Well,
whatever. And I think that is what is sort of the id becomes
yeah.
embraced, is something that is certainly
Well,
true. Um,
and you say the id. I wrote an essay in 2016. Todd Alcott made a great piece of art for me of Donald Trump as the id monster from Forbidden Planet. And the Republican Party are the Krell. They turned on a machine that ran on white people's nightmares.
Oh yeah.
And 40 years later, the result was Donald Trump. And but it's a clear progression. It's not like half the shit that came out of Donald Trump's mouth didn't also come out of Richard Nixon's mouth or Ronald Reagan's mouth. It's just, and the thing about Never Trumpers is, I say, you object to his manners.
Oh yeah.
That's it. It's not a policy disagreement.
No, they have no policy disagreement. There's legitimate, like, as I said, like people say, we need a Republican Party. I don't think we do. AOC and Manchin are very different people. And I think you could have two separate parties. It's not even about their, I mean, it's just about what they propose and what they believe are very different. There's room for that. And I think when you're just saying we need a party that's just, I don't think we need people like Bobart or Marjorie Taylor Greene, though Republicans have long needed them. And they had needed those voters. So what they, the idea was that these are we will give some red meat to them, wink, wink, but but the people who run the party will be respectable and give a plausible deniability for the suburban knights who vote for us. And the monster went off the leash. The mobsters are sort of, to kind of go to Godfather Part 2, they're suddenly like, it's like Michael Corleone saying, why do I need this senator as the front man of politeness? Why don't I just knock him off and just run for Senate myself openly as a mobster?
Right.
Because obviously you couldn't do that. But now it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene's like, I can run this stuff openly as a horrible person. I think that's what Trumpism unveiled. It's like, we don't need the front men. And so the front men are sort of like, oh my God, this is dangerous. And they're kind of coming over to the Democratic Party being like, help us, because, our game is over. But it's like, well, there's no real market for what you are offering, unfortunately. So, I will say, I don't think it's necessarily about, I do think the overt cruelty and overt does matter. It's not like I'm saying I like Liz Cheney or I like a world of what her politics or whatever, but even the subtle stuff, if you're living in a world, even kind of subtle passive stuff is worse, that is preferable rather to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just treating you like crap day after day. If you're trans, if you're a marginalized group, it's like, this is just brutal compared to, okay, I know you guys probably don't like us, you're not crazy about us, but I don't go to school and I have bullies. The bullies at school weren't necessarily mimicking George H.W. Bush. They weren't like giving 1,000 points of light in word, or they weren't doing that. It was like, but they could just repeat whatever Tucker Carlson is saying or whatever Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying to a trans. Like, there's no barrier. So it's just the worst of the worst. And that's unfortunate.
That's I remember asking my mother in 1980, because she really hated Reagan. I said, why is he different? Because obviously she hated Nixon. But, Nixon created the EPA. There was I don't remember him making a huge stink about Roe versus Wade passing. I mean, he had his own trouble at the time. But maybe I'm wrong. I kind of remember him being agnostic. Like, I don't remember him having an opinion about abortion. If he ever spoke about it, it's certainly not a thing that has survived as a thing that's quoted by the right, for example. And I said, what's different about Ronald Reagan? And she said, if you look at the word conservative, it means you conserve things. You do not step forward. Doesn't mean you step backwards, though. She said, a guy like Eisenhower, for all that he was a Republican, when civil rights laws passed, when anti-segregation laws passed, he enforced them. Because that's where we're at right now. And he wants to keep it where it's at right now. He doesn't want it to get better. But he also doesn't say, no, we're going to actually resegregate the schools. We're actually going to resegregate the United States Army, which was only desegregated 5 years ago. He doesn't try to undo. She's like, the point of Reagan is to undo progress. And that's been what the Republicans have been up to. And the hard thing, the reason why Reagan was so and why Republicans objected so much to Medicare. It's the same reason they object to everything. Just like gay marriage. Once you let it pass, and a decade later, it's now, about a decade later, find me a straight person that's mad about gay marriage. You can't, because it hasn't affected them. It was never going to affect them. And Republican lawmakers knew that if you let it out, then that's one more wedge issue they don't have. Like, why are they not angry about gay marriage now? Why aren't they out in the streets campaigning against gay marriage? Because it's too late. The genie's out of the bottle. You can't fight Medicare. You can't fight gay marriage. You can't fight the Social Security Administration. They will try to cut its budget, but you can't run on it.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody likes it.
And there were gay Republicans, Tim Miller is one, who was working with Jeb Bush. And, you were like, but Bush was proposing doing a lot, taking away your marriage or taking whatever. I think it was understood that some of this is red meat, but they weren't going to do it. And now these guys are going to do it, even if it's not popular. They're going to pass the worst abortion laws. They're going to appeal, because they've also gerrymandered everything so that they're only accountable to the Marjorie Taylor Greene part of their base anyway. That's one of the worst parts of gerrymandering. And so, I think a lot of the modern Democratic Party is, I say the most of it, even some of the progressives, if you don't disagree, even if you're not fans of it, 90% of them are still respectful of institutions, of the law and whatever, to the point of that's conservatism in America, really. And there isn't, the Republican Party, there aren't conservatives.
No, it's all radicals. Yeah, it's all
like, okay,
radical.
we'll break this and do whatever we can to pass this. I mean, there's nothing conservative about that.
No,
like, conservatism itself isn't that popular. Most people, that's like when you talk about the filibuster and have issues with when Dianne Feinstein, when it looked like they were going to expand the Senate majority to the 51, I think she was quoted in late 2022 saying that's okay as long as we don't get too aggressive. And it's like, well, I think the average person doesn't care. Like, the average person doesn't care about the filibuster if it's like, oh, I'm able to feed my kid. I'm able to feed my kid. I have more health insurance because 51 people voted for it instead of 60. Like, I don't care. And I think, and unfortunately, it's only the evil people, the Republicans, who get that. No, the voters, we're gonna nuke the filibuster, put on radicals on the courts, and everyone's like, well, that 22-year-old that you put on the court is clearly unqualified. The ABA is like, they don't care. The average, they've never been punished. The voters have never been punished by that. And even then, it's sort of asymmetrical warfare, right? Because Democrats still like, okay, our justices are going to be fair, and they're going to be, our judges, it's going to be a lawyer. Here's their career, and here's what they've done. Everything. It's going to be maybe a 50-year-old, because as it takes to get the credit. And it's like, okay, well, we're doing that, which is good, but you realize the other guys, whenever they get their point judges, it's like a pimply teenager,
right?
Who like just watched some Law and Order, And like Democrats on the Judiciary Committee are like, well, no. This judge, the guy is like, no, we're fine. The Republicans like, okay, no, we're fine. We're going to confirm him, and he'll overturn abortion, even though he has a degree in advanced law and order studies. It's like they don't care.
I mean, the thing that Trump was ultimately a stress test for American democracy, and it failed. And we saw all of the biggest thing to me that comes out of Trump in terms of American jurisprudence is we have way too many norms and not enough laws.
Yes.
There are things that we were like, well, obviously, now that Nixon got embarrassed, everyone's going to release their taxes when they run for president, because you won't win if you're so transparently criminal that you won't release your taxes. Turns out,
no,
douchebags don't care about that. The things that you can now get away with in American public life, maybe you could have always gotten away with, but no one tried to get away with them.
And the Senate was written with these crazy rules that, like, you need to blow up the Senate because it's structured, you say, with norms and rules. So it's just like, okay, well, obviously no one would exploit a clearly senile old woman who can't work. Obviously they'll let you put in a replacement to her. I'm sure they would have done, Democrats would have done the same without an issue. If it was when McCain was sick, they wouldn't have used that to exploit their political advantage. Republicans like,
Yeah.
of course we would. And like, you obviously would not just simply stop, endanger national security and stop like appointing people for key positions just so you can say, unless Biden screws over queer people, we're not going to put any
Yeah,
more.
we're gonna hold back 300 promotions in the United States military because that has everything to do with homosexual rights in
It's
the
like, no,
United
we have
States.
every power to sort of do this or what we do.
Yeah.
And it's like,
No, and the biggest thing that I think this is one of the things we definitely agree on is that there is no profit in pointing out hypocrisy.
no, it doesn't,
They
because
don't
it's not
care.
hypocritical. It's like their goal. It's like,
They've
no, no,
never
no,
cared.
I'm evil. I'm going to
Yeah.
do whatever
Yeah.
I do whatever I want. That's going to gain me power.
Yeah.
And when folks are like, wait a minute, people are still voting and you're going to ram Amy Coney Barrett in, but like, what about the rule literally you made up? And they just
Yeah.
laughed at Democrats. It's like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. Like, it's all about power. And when you use it, and I think that power comes up is a question I would ask you, because whenever we talk about sort of the coup attempt with Trump, when Trump had clearly lost the
Yeah.
popular vote by a significant amount, by the amount, I think, of several small states. And,
Yeah.
you had Ted Cruz and you had others like, okay, here's how we can steal it. And I think inherent is in that the larger question really was sort of, okay, Democrats, what were you going to do if this happened? Because it seems like they were doing this on a plan of like, oh yeah, it's like my coming into your house. If my plan is to come into your house and take everything I see behind you and then leave,
Right.
my sense is that either you're not going to do anything, I'm just going to laugh
Mm-hmm.
at you while taking away everything you have and walking out, or I have gangsters with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm prepared to use violence. I feel like there's not enough of a sense of, you have to dig deep. Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, they had to know that the idea is that, okay, we have to use violence. Like, clearly, if we just steal an election under BS terms, obviously we're going to have to either use martial law on people who protest, while understanding that the institutionalists, for the Dianne Feinsteins and on, are not going to just be like, okay, well, like, what would Dick Durbin do? He'd be like, well, that's really terrible that I guess Biden's not president. I guess what can we do? But I guess they stole it and we'll just try again next time, right? Like,
there's some, it's hard to do a counterfactual on that one for the reason that I won't say the institutions held, but disasters, to me, this is one of my overall theories of history. The unspeakable happens because it's unthinkable. Pearl Harbor works to the degree that Pearl Harbor is successful for the Japanese is because it requires 5 people to go, that's not happening.
mm-hmm.
Guy, destroyer commander sinks a Japanese spy submarine in the middle of Pearl Harbor about 5 a.m. Radios in, says, hey, not for nothing, but the Japanese are up to something. I found a spy submarine in the harbor and I sunk it. The person he tells goes, there are no Japanese spy submarines in the harbor. You blew up some driftwood or whatever. Mm-hmm. Radar operator reads 500 fighter planes coming over Henderson Field, calls it in. The guy goes, those are B-17s coming in from Wake Island. There must be a little early. You're seeing 20 B-17s and you're interpreting it as 450 radar blips. A whole bunch of people have to go like, that's not happening. That's not real. 9/11 is the same way. It is a cascade of people going, but that couldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happens. And January 6th is the same thing. Whereas if the government, and remember, it's very important to remember that on January 6th, Donald Trump is the head of the government, which means Democrats' ability to affect things on the ground is very different on January 6th than it is on January 21st. But I really believe that only happens because it's unthinkable. if it was thinkable, the National Guard would have been there that morning. If it was thinkable, deadly force would have been authorized.
Mm-hmm.
If those January 6th rioters had been black people rioting because Donald Trump had won the election, there would have been a massacre. They would have been machine gunned down. Flamethrowers would have been used on them. And I think that sort of the good news, bad news about January 6th is it is no longer unthinkable. And it's no longer, I don't know that it would happen the same way again. Now that genie is, because also it's like, it's not the force that Trump assembles is not sufficient to take the Capitol from any serious. All of those cops that got overrun had sidearms.
Well, their hope was to delay the certification, and so that's the case using that specific. And to the degree it worked. There are some Republicans who they never were forced to testify to this, but they stated that they knew people who said, "I know there's no fraud. I'm still going to vote to overturn it because I'm afraid for my life." So essentially, that's stochastic terrorism. That terrorism, that sense of I can't trust these people, they will kill me if I don't do what Trump wants.
Fans.
And so I'm more concerned actually, David, about the soft coup, because a lot of the people who didn't, the Trump appointed judges who didn't, throw out election results, who, the legislators who said, okay, well, no, this is not legal. It's not so much that they are morally bound. I think there was a legitimate sense of, well, if I go along with this, I'm going to go to jail. It's kind of like, I want to believe I am so morally impressed that we don't cheat on our wives because we know it's a bad thing to do. Not that we would get away. That's sort of the the idea of like, and that's way too many Woody Allen movies with the idea of like, no, people don't kill their mistresses when they become inconvenient because they're afraid of getting caught, but if they knew they wouldn't get caught, they do it. But a lot of that's the case of a lot of these guys. It was just sort of, well, if they believe that, okay, well, obviously it'd be political suicide, I'd get arrested, but no one did. Ted Cruz is still in the Senate. And the people who have no jobs were the ones who said no. So that is usually where I worry, because I feel like
and I get that, but to me, the point is that 1,000 of those people are now going to jail. Not the legislators, and not the ones in the safe red districts. All got to come back. The 147 who voted to not certify, who literally voted to not honor a national election. You've seen me say this on Twitter. I bring it all back to, I have great fondness for General Grant and for Abraham Lincoln, but I blame them for not hanging Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis. I think Nixon's pardon, it all goes back to if Jefferson Davis did some jail time, but it's treason. Certainly everyone above the rank of colonel in the Confederate Army should have hung. Certainly I would have hung anyone who put a hand on a Bible and said, I accept this commission in the United States Army and vow to uphold the Constitution. Those guys should have hung. They should have swung. And I'm not a pro capital punishment guy. I'm just saying the legal system in 1865, as it exists, demand that they be executed publicly.
Killing Lincoln was essentially a coup.
Right. And by the way, whenever people say, Martin wouldn't approve of all this rioting, Martin was for nonviolence, I was like, and they shot him in the head, proving that violence works. Not to denigrate Martin Luther King Jr. in any way, but people always forget that he did not exist in a vacuum. It's much easier, and this may be a cynical view, but it's much easier to be Martin Luther King Jr. when you got Malcolm X out there and you got people burning the fucking cities. Because the only reason Martin Luther King Jr. got anything done really in the white world is he was able to say, look, those people burning the cities, I can stop them if you give me something.
If you give me a legacy. Even Malcolm X is a moderate white. He's like a moderate white guy. He's like, I'm not going to start anything, but if you literally kill children in a school. Imagine terrorists killing 4 white girls in a school. Like that whole place is bombed and razed. That's how Americans respond to stuff.
But that's my point is that
like I will just actually defend ourselves. That's a very American belief system.
But that's my point is that people always work like Martin did all this. It's like he was able to do all that because people were burning Newark to the ground and Boston to the ground and Chicago to the ground. Like without Philadelphia burning, Martin doesn't accomplish a goddamn thing. You know?
And to your point, I think one of the more amusing things was there was apparently Robert Kennedy was telling his brother, essentially, we've got to do something. Like Black people are very angry. Like my friends, their maids even seem angry. Like, and that seems laughable, but think about, these are people in your homes. And I have one of my best friends, she's a very nice lady, who kind of was able to have a sort of out of the mouth of babes thinks of her. And she's like, well, it seems like you would have to be very paranoid if you're like oppressing people who are cooking your food and raising your kids and in your house. Like she just did like, well, obviously this is gonna like create a sense of and that's why you have all these so eventually it was like, oh yeah, it could get really ugly very quickly.
You ever see a movie called The Dry White Season? It's about apartheid. And it's one of those white savior apartheid lawyer movies, but there's a great moment in it that to me gives away the whole trembling fear at the base of white supremacy. Is the lawyers, I think the lawyer's Donald Sutherland, his beautiful wife, high-class white wife, says to him, if we get rid of apartheid, they'll kill every white person in the country within a week. And Donald Sutherland, who's been spending time among apartheid activists, is just baffled by that response. And he says, no, they won't. They don't want that. Why do you think that? And she says, if someone did to me what we've done to them, I'd kill them all. I'd want them all dead. Give me the power. Give me the machete. I'd cut all their heads off. And it's like, right. Villains can't see anything but how they would respond in a circumstance. They don't get that people just want to fucking live and be left alone.
Well, that's the trope from the TV tropes. Evil cannot comprehend good, which is I've always found very inspiring, like a great character sense of like to get inside the character to get the idea that. But although I have written villains who I think the more dangerous ones do understand good because they can exploit it, like they and exploit a potential weakness. So understanding of like, here's where I can push you because you won't react as I do. I think that brings it back to, I think a lot of modern Republicans are the villains who actually do understand good to a bit. They're like,
we just don't care.
When you guys get the Senate, you're not gonna do this to us. You're not gonna like go out for blood the way we would. You're not going to do these things either. They just think we're chomps, but you know, that's how they interpret, like, you're chomps. You're not gonna like come back. And those are the most, when sort of your compassion or what you believe is appropriate is sort of being exploited, is sort of the most dangerous. But
no, I agree. And as an aside, to bring it back to writing, just for the last bit, that I always think that a villain that doesn't have a point is a badly written villain. The best villains, you go like, they're not 100% wrong, but holy shit, the methods are, one of my favorite moments it's such a great mid-century existentialist moment in Goldfinger, of all movies, when James Bond says your nerve gas attack on Fort Knox will kill 30,000 people or 60,000 people needlessly. Goldfinger's comeback is, American motorists kill that many every 2 years. Like, after Hiroshima, you're going to quibble with me over 60,000 people? Like, do we really care about killing? If we cared about killing 60,000 people, smoking would be illegal. Like, why are you coming to me about killing 60,000 people? Guns are going to kill that many. Smoking's going to kill that many. Little old Auric Goldfinger is barely approaching their numbers. What do you care? Yeah. And I love the idea of a villain viewing the history of mankind and going, 60,000 people is like a rounding error, man. I don't, like, I don't, why should
be worse?
Why should that stand between me and getting rich? They're going to die anyway, one way or another.
Yeah. I mean, and what's interesting about that is like, that literally is a calculation that corporations have made about polluting or about recalls and so whatever. So those are all, I mean, we're all part of the same hypocrisy, as Michael Corleone said. It is that sort of sense of the value. I'm placing a value. We all place a value on life and whatever. And I think the villains who, I'm a big fan of Angels in America, and I think whatever people say, how could, and it always annoys me, and I think a lot of liberals do this, how could Clarence Thomas betray his own people? And it's like, well, no, he wants to be amongst the most powerful. And so he just thinks, why do you liberals want me to be powerless, to me to be someone who's of no one? It's sort of, as Roy Cohn says in Angels in America, it's like, homosexuals are people with no power, no anything. I have sex with men. I don't have AIDS. I have stomach cancer. Like, I am in a position of power.
Right.
And I think that is what is most important whenever it's kind of like, how can Amy Coney Barrett be the handmaiden for it? No, she just wants to be powerful. She's
it's, someone retweeted some Jewish writer upholding white supremacy the other day. And I was like, capo's gonna capo, man. Like, that's, someone's got to be the guard at the concentration camp, and that's the job they're applying for. So, someone wants to be the trustee among the other prisoners and get the best cigarettes. That's, if you think that's the best you can do, then you think that's the best you can do. But that's, it's, I don't find it hard to understand at all. I mean, the world is full of women who will vote against the interests of women because they want their husbands to remain in power over them,
or to be powerful. I mean, the idea is like, well, I think not that I can speak for the feminist movement, but it's just like, you do get that not every woman in the world is, Hillary Clinton or Nancy Pelosi or, any, Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Ketanji Brown Jackson or Kamala, any of high achieving, so I've been at,
and oh my God, do they hate those women?
Well, I've been at conferences where, a legal firm, and it's like, they bring out and all the spouses are like sitting by the pool drinking, and it's great. And I'm there, because my wife is the badass law firm partner, and I'm sitting there, and it's like, I'm sure one of those older women are looking at me and like, oh, right, because there's only so many law firm, and the only spouses, how many people have in the Mai Tais, because I essentially, what was valued was to be pretty, to be a nice wife, the hostess, and that's how I got here. And now if it's like the black writer who's married to the law firm partner, or the woman married to the lesbian law firm partner, like, the more you open that, you're, and I think there is an argument, well, no, there's no zero-sum game in life. It's like, well, no, I think they do see it as a zero-sum game.
Oh, I mean, that's again, we've agreed they're not conservative, they're radicals, but it's the conservative view of the world is absolutely that it's a zero-sum game, that a piece of bread in my mouth, in your mouth, is a piece of bread that is not in my mouth. That's, that they don't think, well, or we could build another oven. We could bake more bread. There's plenty of flour in the world. We're not going to run out. Actually, we can bake bread for everybody. And it's like, no, I'd rather you not have any bread, though.
Yeah.
That would be better for me, is if you don't have any bread, then I don't have to worry about your bread. My father explained racism to me when I was a little kid, and I asked him about it. I believe it came up because we had a once a week housekeeper at a time when we had a little bit of money, not a lot of money, but a little bit of money. And one day she said, I would like to leave early today. And my mother said, that's fine. Why? And she said, well, my husband is speaking at the Klan rally in Milltown, or wherever the hell it was. This is suburban New Jersey. She's talking to a Jewish woman married to a Catholic, by the way. So how she thought, like, the Klan was going to be okay with a Jew and a Catholic, like, is a weird ass. But my mother said, "Oh yeah, no, you can go to that and you can never come back ever again. Here's every dime I owe you. Get the hell out of my house." And I think later I asked my father, "What is, I'm 6 at the most. Probably I'm 5." And I said, "What's the Ku Klux Klan? What does it represent? What is all this? What was that whole interaction about?" This was a nice old white lady. I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know she was Eva Brown. And my father said, there are people that hate people that aren't like them. And I said, why? Why do white people hate black people? And he said, people who are down need to feel like there's someone more down than they are. And he said, and again, I'm going to use the language he used at the time. Poor white folks, white trash, the only people in the world they can feel better than is a black person.
Oh, yeah.
And they think they're better than Sidney Poitier. They think they're better than Harry Belafonte. Like the guy, the guy working at I think he said the guy working at the gas station is a white guy, absolutely thinks he's better than Ralph Bunche, the, ambassador to the UN. Absolutely thinks he deserves everything in the world, and Ralph Bunche deserves nothing.
Yeah.
And Sidney Poitier deserves nothing. And,
well, like the
whatever
folks who believe that MAGA and Tucker Carlson and others, they hate the elite. No. They hate because the elite, and you watch, they're women of color, men of color, people, queer people who they believe should be underneath them. And so that's what they view as the elite. And and before we have time, and I was watching a Cabaret for the first time in years, a local production in Portland, and it's just right there, the Tomorrow That Comes to Me scene, where in the play it's the sex worker and then the businessman, and they're united in their Nazism because it's of like, for different reasons, they hate Jews. And this is what unites that sort of whatever the sex worker's economic anxiety, it is that I've been looked down upon. I will no longer be looked down upon. And the Nazis have said, these are people you can look down on. We're going to give them to you. And you're, and we will assert an order where you are above someone and you can stand by my side while we're doing it. And I think I remember watching it, like, oh my God, this is so prescient, just 50 years ago. I mean, similar with the humor where, Joel Grey does the Hitler mustache and they're making stuff in the film version. And it's like, well, yes, because Nazis are ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'd written about this, of how I'm always afraid of, like, I don't want to be like 30 years from now being like someone watching an old Saturday Night Live is like, wait a minute, how could they have ever been making fun of Red Hats and Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever? Because they're, because they've done something so horrible. The idea that you could think it's ever funny as just on its own would seem ridiculous. So the idea of the Kit Kat girl, hey, we're going to go goose step, because goose stepping's absurd, right? Like, objectively, but it's become, because of what happened later, it's so horrible. The idea that you see people as a joke going, ha, 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 Hail Hitler is supposed to be, because yes, at the time it seemed ridiculous, and then things changed. And so that's always sort of a call to vigilance.
No, I get that. I mean, I think that it is your duty to mock them while also taking them as seriously as a danger.
Exactly.
That's the, I remember in 2016, early on in 2016 or late in 2015, I said, I had watched a couple of movies that took place in the interwar period. And I remember thinking, be the guy boring everyone talking about Hitler at the cocktail party in your life. Like, because every movie set in the interwar period has some fabulous cocktail party where, someone says, oh, Feldman, stop going on and on about Hitler. He doesn't talk about you all the time. It's like, no, really, he does though. No one has ever, be alarmist. Be absolutely fucking alarmist about Nazis. Always be alarmist about Nazis. That's that there is no shame in being alarmist about Nazis, about fascism, about racism, about all of those ideologies. And and yes, mockery is definitely part of how we deal with them, but that doesn't mean you laugh them off as not being, because again, Nixon was absurd. The sheer metric ton of, I'm old enough, I remember the metric ton of comedy about Nixon. When Oliver Stone made that Nixon movie and I watched the trailer, I said, oh wait, this is a drama? You can't make a drama about Richard Nixon. You can't. He's too ridiculous. The minute someone does an accurate impression of Richard Nixon, you are laughing. The minute someone does an accurate impression of Kissinger, you're laughing. You can make Dr. Strangelove about Nixon. You can't make Patton about Nixon. Like, it has to be. And there's a, HBO is doing a movie on the White House plumbers coming out, our miniseries, and it's a comedy because those guys were fucking ridiculous. Yes, they threatened democracy, absolutely, but you can't make G. Gordon Liddy not funny. Like, as chilling as he is, you can't make him not funny. Like, Dick is in many ways a better movie than All the President's Men.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it takes the material at what it really was. And honestly, I think that's a more accurate depiction. Will Ferrell and Bruce McCullough, that is a more accurate depiction of the Woodward-Bernstein friendship than Redford and Hoffman. 100%. Those guys fucking hated each other. I think that's clear. And there was no camaraderie or, buddy cop thing. Those were two narcissists who hated each other. But anyway.
Well, thank you so much. And this will probably wind up 2 different podcasts, episodes, part 1 and part 2, because we always have so much fun talking together. And before we go, what more can we look for? I know there's some upcoming projects. So
there is. Well, the May 17th, Elvira in Monsterland #1 drops. The premise of the previous series, Elvira in Horrorland, was that movies all form their own little pocket dimensions where the story just happens in a loop over and over again. And called them, which I called with tongue very firmly in cheek, the multiverse of movies. And in the first series, Elvira is stuck bouncing between the movies and can't help herself from interfering in the plots of them and screwing everything up. And the plot of that one was mostly her trying to get home while making a mess of great horror movies. In the upcoming series, her ongoing villain, Vlad the Impaler, gets his hands on the magical MacGuffin that allows you to navigate the multiverse of movies and starts building a monster army by kidnapping movie monsters. And the first issue, he visits every significant vampire movie that I could think of or that I could fit in 20 pages. And my friend Richard Fairgray, who's an amazing cartoonist, suggested the title, It's a Vlad world for that issue, which I am enormously fond of. Issue 2, that comes out the 17th. In June, we get Frankie Goes to Hollywood. You might guess what monster is involved there. The 3rd issue is called Howl. And the 4th issue is called You Don't Look Kai-Jewish, where we deal with Godzilla and his ilk. And 5 will probably be something called Mad Monster Party or words to that effect. But yeah, that's the 5 months following May 17th. And I've got a lot of other stuff coming, but not quite. The one I can talk about is in October. I think it's October. Bat Wheels comes back, which is a preschool children's show that's sort of a cross between Batman and Cars, but without the creepy "there are no human beings" aesthetic, which I find so off-putting. Are the cars having sex? How are there more? I don't want to know. But in this one, the Bat computer brings the Bat vehicles to life through artificial intelligence, and they have their own personalities as children and all that kind of. It's a delightful show for preschoolers, and I wrote for anyone, but it's really pitched very young, and I wrote 3 episodes of it. And that's coming back in, like I said, I think 2nd season comes in October.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David.
My pleasure, Stephen. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
And we will see you guys next time. Again, this will be 2 and part 1 and part 2. Take care. Bye-bye.